It was a quiet Friday evening, the kind where loneliness crept in despite the city lights gleaming outside my apartment window. My relationship with Mike was on life support, a tangle of arguments and icy silences, and that evening, his absence felt like both a punishment and a reprieve. I scrolled mindlessly through my phone until my finger paused on an unopened message from Emma. "Swingers night this weekend, come with me. You won't regret it." Winking face. Emma always had a way of drawing me into her world, one drenched in bold decisions and unspoken rules. A part of me hesitated, torn between the comfort of staying home and the allure of doing something outrageous, something different. My mind flashed back to our last conversation. Her stories of velvet lounges, strangers with confident smiles, and the kind of freedom I had only ever dared to imagine. That's how I found myself hours later in front of an upscale townhouse, its dimly lit exterior concealing whatever secrets lay inside. My black dress clung to me in all the right ways, yet I felt utterly exposed. Emma greeted me at the door, her lipstick a daring red, her smile playful and full of mischief. "Relax, babe," she murmured, sliding a glass of champagne into my hand. "It's just a party." The air inside was intoxicating, a mix of sultry jazz, low murmurs, and the faintest hint of something untamed. Couples mingled on lush couches, their laughter cascading over the rim of crystal glasses. Others moved closer, their exchanges soft and intimate, like stolen moments in a world suspended from judgment. Emma drifted into the crowd, leaving me to navigate this curious playground. I leaned against the bar, sipping my drink, trying to appear as unbothered as the others. Then he walked in. Tall, sharp features, and a presence that made the room pause. His eyes caught mine, held them with a quiet intensity that made my breath hitch. Without a word, he approached and stood beside me. "You look like you could use a refill," he said, his voice smooth and low, his smile disarming. The warmth in his gaze melted away my nerves, and before I knew it, we were locked in conversation, about art, music, even travel. His confidence was magnetic, and the way he spoke made the room fade away. The air between us grew heavier, and I found myself leaning in, caught in a moment that was both thrilling and terrifying. The night blurred into vivid snapshots, Emma laughing with a group of strangers, the feel of his hand brushing against mine, the way his voice softened as he leaned closer, his breath warm against my ear. The boundaries between us and the rest of the room dissolved, leaving only this raw, electric connection. When he finally pulled me toward the quieter corner of the room, my pulse raced with anticipation. The wine buzzed through my veins, and the world spun in a haze of possibility. This wasn't just a party, it was an escape, a place where rules didn't exist, where desires lived and breathed freely. But just as the thrill threatened to overwhelm me, Emma appeared, her hand lightly brushing my arm. "You good?" she asked, her tone light but her gaze sharp. It was the grounding I didn't realize I needed. I smiled at her, nodding, and she gave me a knowing wink before disappearing back into the crowd. The door clicked shut behind us, and the noise from the party softened to a distant hum. The room Nathan had led me to wasn't anything like I'd expected. It wasn't lavish or grand. It was intimate. Warm golden light spilled from a low-hanging lamp, casting soft shadows on the walls. A plush love seat sat near the window, overlooking the city lights. The space felt like it belonged to another world entirely, far from the pulsing energy outside. Nathan lingered by the door, his gaze steady but gentle, as if waiting for me to take the lead. "You okay?" he asked, his voice calm and soothing. I nodded, though my heart was racing. "I think so." He smiled at that, a small, knowing smile that somehow put me at ease. "But this isn't about doing anything you're not ready for. It's just about being here in the moment." His words settled over me like a soft blanket, easing the knot of nerves in my chest. I crossed the room slowly, my heels sinking into the plush carpet, and sank into the love seat by the window. Nathan followed, but he didn't sit right away. Instead, he leaned casually against the windowsill, the glow from the city behind him giving him an almost ethereal edge. You seem more relaxed now, he said, his tone light but curious. Not as guarded. Do I? I asked, my lips curving into a small smile. I guess it's easier to breathe in here. Good, he said simply, his eyes softening. That's what this is supposed to be. A space to just let go. I looked away, my fingers tracing the edge of the cushion as I tried to put words to the mix of emotions swirling inside me. I don't really know how to let go, I admitted after a moment, my voice barely above a whisper. Nathan moved closer then, taking a seat across from me on the edge of the ottoman. He wasn't imposing, he didn't crowd me, but his presence was magnetic, drawing me in like a tether I didn't know I wanted. It's not about knowing how, he said, his voice low but steady. It's about letting yourself feel what's already there. His words lingered in the air, and I found myself meeting his gaze. There was something disarming about him, an openness that made it easy to let my guard slip, if only for a moment. I exhaled softly, leaning back into the cushions, the tension in my shoulders easing as the quiet stretched between us. Nathan reached for the table beside him and poured 2 glasses of wine from a bottle I hadn't noticed before. He handed me one, his fingers brushing mine for the briefest second. The contact was subtle but electric, a spark that seemed to settle somewhere deep in my chest. To new experiences, he said, raising his glass slightly. To letting go, I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. We clinked glasses, the faint chime breaking the stillness, and I took a sip. The wine was rich, the kind that warmed you from the inside out. Nathan leaned back slightly, his posture easy but his gaze unwavering. I felt the weight of it, not heavy or demanding, but present, anchoring me in this strange, surreal moment. You're still nervous, he said, not as a question but as an observation. A little, I admitted, but not in a bad way. Good, he said, his lips curving into a small smile. Sometimes nervous energy is just excitement in disguise. I laughed softly, the sound breaking some of the tension inside me. You sound like you've done this before. I've been here before, he said carefully. But every moment is different. Every person is different. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard, and for the first time, I felt myself relax completely. I set my glass on the table and let my hands fall to my lap, my fingers idly tracing the fabric of my dress. Why did you bring me here? I asked, my voice quieter now, more vulnerable. Because I thought you might want a space to breathe, he said simply. And maybe to see yourself the way I do. His words sent a ripple through me, soft and unexpected. I looked away, feeling my cheeks flush, but I didn't pull back. Instead, I let the silence between us deepen, let it wrap around us like a cocoon. Nathan shifted closer, his movements slow and deliberate, his hand brushing mine lightly. It wasn't a demand, not even a question, just a quiet acknowledgement of the connection building between us. My pulse quickened, but I didn't pull away. Instead, I let the moment linger, let the warmth of his presence settle over me. This is new for you, he said softly. Yes, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. And that's okay, he said, his tone reassuring. We don't have to rush anything. This is about what you want. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel the need to overthink. I didn't feel the pressure to make a decision or to figure out what came next. Instead, I let myself exist in the moment, in the quiet intimacy of the space we'd created. The room was warm, the golden light pooling around us like a spotlight cast only for two. I stood there for a moment, my back against the closed door, feeling the pulse of the night echo in my chest. Nathan's eyes never left mine, his presence steady and calm, grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. There was no rush, no expectation, just the quiet intensity of the moment. He moved closer, but not too close, his hands resting lightly in his pockets. You're quiet, he said, his voice low and soothing. Regrets already? I shook my head, a soft smile tugging at my lips. No regrets, just taking it all in. The tension in the room shifted, settling into something softer, something that felt almost safe. He gestured to the plush armchair by the window, and I sank into it gratefully, suddenly aware of how fast my heart was beating. He leaned against the windowsill, the city lights casting a faint glow behind him. "It's not always like this," he said, his tone thoughtful. "These parties, sometimes they're louder, more chaotic. But tonight feels different." "Different how?" I asked, curious despite myself. He smiled, a small, private smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hard to say. Maybe it's just you." The words hung in the air, and I felt the warmth rise in my cheeks. I looked away, focusing on the glass of wine still in my hand, the way the light caught the deep red liquid. The quiet between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with unspoken possibilities. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't overthinking every move, every word. There was no checklist in my mind, no need to measure up to anyone's expectations. Here in this strange charged moment I felt present. He moved closer, settling into the seat across from me. The silence stretched again, but this time it was like a thread, pulling us tighter together. His gaze met mine, steady and unyielding, and I found myself leaning forward slightly, caught in the pull of something I couldn't quite name. "You're not like most people who come to these," he said, his voice breaking the stillness. "I can tell." I laughed softly, the sound more nervous than I intended. What gave it away? The deer-in-headlights look when I walked in. "Maybe," he admitted, his lips curving into a grin. "But it's more than that. You're here, but it's like you're still deciding whether or not to stay." His observation hit a little too close to home, and I took a long sip of wine to buy myself time. "Maybe I am," I said finally, my voice quieter than before. "That's okay," he said, leaning back in his chair, his posture relaxed. "No one's keeping score. You don't have to decide anything tonight." The reassurance was unexpected, and I felt a knot in my chest loosen slightly. "Why are you here?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. He didn't answer right away, his gaze drifting to the window. "Same reason as you, I suppose. Looking for something different." I tilted my head, intrigued. "And have you found it?" He looked back at me then, his eyes soft but unreadable. "Maybe." The night outside seemed impossibly still, the sounds of the city distant and muted. I set my glass down on the table between us, my hands folding in my lap. For a moment I felt exposed, as though he could see right through the carefully constructed armor I had worn for so long. "You seem nervous," he said gently. "Do I?" I asked, trying to sound light-hearted but failing miserably. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "But not in a bad way. Like you're on the edge of something. Ready to take a leap." His words struck a chord, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. Was he right? Was that why I was here? To step outside of the boundaries I had drawn for myself. To find out what lay beyond them. The answer lingered just out of reach, but for the first time I didn't feel the need to chase it. Maybe it was enough to simply be here, to let the night unfold however it would. Nathan stood then, extending a hand toward me. "Come on," he said, his smile warm and inviting. "Let's go back to the others. The night's still young." I hesitated for only a second before taking his hand, his touch steadying me as I rose to my feet. Together, we stepped back into the vibrant hum of the party, the door clicking shut behind us like the closing of a chapter. Stepping back into the main room felt like emerging into a different world. The energy had shifted, warmer, more fluid. Conversations flowed like wine. Laughter bubbled in pockets of people scattered across the space, and the faint rhythm of music hummed under it all. Nathan kept my hand in his for a moment longer than necessary before letting it fall away. "Take a deep breath," he said, his voice light but reassuring. "You're doing fine." I wasn't sure if he meant being at the party or simply existing in this moment, but I nodded all the same. It felt like a small victory that I hadn't bolted for the door yet. Emma was perched on the arm of a sofa, her legs crossed, her eyes sparkling as she chatted with a group of people. She caught my eye and waved me over with a grin that was both comforting and mischievous. Nathan gave me a slight nudge, and I made my way to her, weaving through the room like I belonged. "Well, look who decided to come back," Emma teased as I reached her. She reached for my hand, pulling me into the circle. "Everyone meet my best friend. Be nice, she's new." The group chuckled warmly, and I felt a flicker of ease settle over me. They were a mix of ages, styles, and energies, each person radiating a kind of relaxed confidence that made me feel both out of place and strangely drawn in. "So, what do you think?" asked a woman with wavy auburn hair, her voice melodic and curious. "Not what you were expecting, right?" I shook my head, laughing softly. "Not at all. It's different." "Good different or bad different?" asked a man across the room, his dark eyes sparkling with humor as he sipped from a crystal tumbler. He was magnetic, the kind of person who commanded attention without even trying. "Good," I said after a beat. "I think." The group laughed, and the tension in my shoulders eased further. Conversation flowed around me, light and playful. Emma handed me another glass of wine, and I let myself relax into the rhythm of the room. The edges of my self-consciousness blurred, replaced by a growing sense of curiosity. At one point, the auburn-haired woman leaned closer, her eyes searching mine. "So what brought you here?" she asked, her tone gentle but probing. Emma jumped in before I could answer. "A breakup," she said, her voice dripping with mock tragedy. "A tragic case of heartbreak in need of a wild night." I laughed, shaking my head. "It's not that dramatic," I said, though her words weren't entirely wrong. The woman smiled knowingly. "Breakups have a way of making us brave. Or reckless." She lifted her glass in a toast. "To reinvention." The others joined in, clinking glasses and laughing, and I couldn't help but smile. It felt good, this moment of camaraderie, even if it was fleeting. As the night wore on, I found myself drifting from one conversation to the next, each one a new thread in the fabric of the evening. There was something intoxicating about the way the people here carried themselves. Open, unguarded, but never pushy. It wasn't about expectations or pressure. It was about being present, letting the night unfold at its own pace. Nathan appeared again at my side, his presence quiet but grounding. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice low enough that it felt like a secret shared just between us. "Surprisingly okay," I admitted. "It's not as overwhelming as I thought it would be." He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's the thing about these places. They're not what most people imagine." "What do most people imagine?" asked, genuinely curious. He tilted his head thoughtfully. "Yes, indulgence. But it's not really about that. It's about freedom, being honest with yourself, even if just for one night." The words hung in the air, resonating more deeply than I expected. I glanced around the room, taking in the ease with which everyone moved, the way the boundaries between strangers seemed to dissolve. It was a world apart from anything I'd known, yet somehow it didn't feel wrong. "Come on," Nathan said, his smile turning playful. "Let me show you something." Before I could second-guess myself, he led me toward a set of French doors that opened onto a balcony overlooking the garden. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of night-blooming flowers. We stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the party muffled behind us. "You seem different," he said finally, his gaze fixed on the stars above. "From when you first walked in." "Different how?" I asked, though I could already feel the answer. "More relaxed. Like you're starting to find your footing." I didn't reply right away, letting the quiet settle between us. He was right. I wasn't the same person who had hesitated at the door hours ago. I was still figuring it out, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward instead of standing still. The balcony wrapped around us like a cocoon, the night air cool against my flushed skin. The muffled hum of the party behind us felt distant, like a world I could step back into or leave behind entirely. Nathan leaned against the railing, his hands tucked into his pockets, his presence calm but charged with something unspoken. I didn't know what I expected when I came here tonight, But this wasn't it. It wasn't the whirlwind of chaos or the reckless abandon I had imagined. It was slower, softer, a quiet unraveling of the walls I hadn't even realized I'd built around myself. "You seem deep in thought," Nathan said, his voice cutting through the stillness. I glanced at him, caught off guard by the gentleness in his tone. "Is it that obvious?" He smiled, his gaze steady. "Not in a bad way. You're just present. It's rare." I looked away, my fingers tracing the edge of the railing. "I don't feel present. I feel lost, I guess." "Lost isn't always bad," he said, shifting closer. "Sometimes it means you're about to find something new." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and I felt my chest tighten. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not," he admitted. "But nothing worth finding ever is." The vulnerability in his voice surprised me, and I turned to face him fully. "Is that why you're here? To find something?" He hesitated, his gaze flickering away for the first time. "Maybe," he said finally. "Or maybe I just like being around people who aren't afraid to admit they don't have all the answers." I laughed softly, the sound breaking the tension. "Well, you've come to the right place. I have zero answers." "That makes two of us," he said, his grin returning. For a moment we just stood there, the silence stretching between us, not awkward but full of possibilities. I could feel the weight of his presence, the way it steadied me, grounded me in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. "You know," he said after a moment, "I think we're all just looking for connection. Whether it's here, at a party like this, or somewhere else. It's what makes us human." His words struck a chord, and I found myself nodding. "Connection," I echoed. "That's all anyone really wants, isn't it? Sometimes we just need a little push to find it," he said, his smile soft. I wasn't sure what drew me to him in that moment. The quiet sincerity in his voice, the way he seemed to see through the layers I worked so hard to keep in place, or maybe just the undeniable pull of the night. But I stepped closer, closing the small distance between us. "You're good at this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Good at what?" he asked, his brow lifting in playful curiosity. "Making people feel like they belong," I said honestly. His smile faltered for a moment, replaced by something deeper. "Maybe that's because I've spent so much time feeling like I didn't." The admission took me by surprise, and before I could think better of it, I reached out, my hand brushing his. The contact was brief, but it felt electric, grounding in a way I didn't expect. "I'm glad you're here," I said softly. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time I didn't feel the need to fill the silence. It was enough to simply exist in this moment, to let the night unfold without forcing it into something it wasn't. Eventually we returned to the party, the energy inside still buzzing but somehow quieter, more subdued. Emma caught my eye across the room and raised her glass in a silent toast. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the wine. The night didn't end with fireworks or dramatic revelations. There was no grand moment where everything fell into place. Instead, it ended the way all nights like this should, with a quiet sense of knowing, of having stepped into something new and come out the other side just a little bit different. As I left the townhouse, the city lights reflecting off the pavement, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Lightness, curiosity, and a lingering warmth that made the cool air feel less biting. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time I was okay with that. Sometimes it's enough to let the night change you, even if just a little.